guys. How is everyone? Um, I am just going to see if, yep, it's working. So, how is everyone this morning? If anybody could hear me, could you just say a quick hello? That would be great. Imagine being up at this time on a Sunday. Um, Obviously with me being in the UK, what I will say to you guys, as I say all the time, and I will, this show is quite graphical. So it may be upsetting to others. So I'm just sharing out just now, guys. So how is everyone? There's one in the chat. Could somebody they say hello? Um, so I'm just sharing out. So I'm looking forward to this one because I'm fascinated also with Ted Bundy. So this will be an interesting one doing Ted Bundy. Um, he was an interesting guy. Sorry guys, you will hear my phone going beep beep. That's me just sharing out. Um, so while I'm doing that, if anybody can hear me, please say hi. I don't bite honestly. Um, oh god. So sorry guys, just make sure I share it in the right groups. I am forever terrible for sharing double what I'm meant to. It's great fun. And then the other thing you've got to watch is Facebook, because Facebook considers it spam, which is crazy. Um, so it's gonna be good one up. Empty can hear me, even if you say hi. Um, just 2 wee seconds, guys, and I will share this out. Da, 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 da. How's everybody's Sunday? Um, Come and let me know where you're from. Um, Sorry guys, I'm getting a bit distracted here with sharing out. Oh, so sorry guys, a bit quieter here. Just give me 2 wee ticks and I will certainly get started. Again guys, my show is quite graphical. So there may be things that are upsetting to viewers. Because I do go into really, really dark places. Um, and some of the things that I do actually talk about may be upsetting to you. So I will always give you that warning, guys. Um, so, so. Um, 2 wee ticks, guys, and I'll be pleased. Anybody could say hello, that would be great. Or even a thumbs up. What? Hi, David. I look terrible this morning, so I am not coming on the video. I look terrible this morning. Um, hey Julianne, how you doing, love? I hope you're well. Um, so yeah, guys, happy Sunday to you. I hope everybody's well and doing good. How is everyone? Um, I'm glad that folk can hear me. That's the main thing. That is the main thing. Um, that's it, sorted. So yeah, you're in the future. I can imagine it's like still Saturday night for you guys while it's Sunday morning for me. I know I can imagine. So guys, I'm going to cover Ted Bundy. Um, Ted Bundy to me was an interesting case. Um, he was a serial killer. He was a rapist. He was nephiliac. He actually admitted to killing 30 women in the 1970s. Though experts actually believe that he killed a lot more. They believe that he actually killed 100. Um, so I'm going to go through looking at all the different, you know, starting from his childhood, working all the way up. Um, Hi Sam, hey my honey. Um, so Ted Bundy was born in November 24th, 1946 in Burlington, Vermont. He actually was a secret love child um, to obviously his mother. Um, her parents were deeply religious. Now you can imagine how their shock horror of their daughter having, a child, illegitimate, wasn't married. Um, when she delivered Ted at home for her unwedded mothers, later she brought Ted Bundy brought up, sorry, the mother brought up Ted Bundy, sorry. Um, Ted's birth certificate lists his father as unknown. Um, so his biological father was never identified. However, there was theories that who his father might be. Um, there was a co-worker of Ted's and an author who wrote about a book about Ted, The Stranger Beside Me, and it suggests that his father was Lloyd Marshall, an Air Force veteran. Other sources actually said that Ted's father was also his grandfather. To hide the fact that he was actually a legitimate child, Bundy was raised as an adopted son to his grandparents and was actually made to believe that his mum was actually his sister. Um, so she moved with Ted to Washington in 1951, where she married a gentleman. So he took, obviously, this gentleman's last name. He didn't have really much respect for his stepfather, to be honest. Whom he resented. Because in Ted's case, it was because he was too uneducated, working in working class. This gentleman and Ted's mum went on to have several other children. So he grew up in a content working class family. At an early age, he showed an unusual interest in the macabre. Um, at the age of, believe it or not, folks, at the age of 3, he became fascinated by knives. Um, which you would think, holy God, why would a 3-year-old be interested in knives? And I think that there should have been the warning sign of why why is this child interested in knives? He was a shy but bright kid. Bundy did well in school, but not with his peers. You could say that Ted Bundy was a wee bit of a loner. Um, According to a criminologist who actually authored a book called Ted Bundy and the Unsolved Murder. Morning, Nicola. Hope you're well, love. Um, Bundy was also known to pick apart mice in the woods and try to drown people while swimming or boating. He had no sense of remorse, he had no sense of guilt, he had no sense of embarrassment, he was ashamed. Um, so you can see from there that Ted Bundy was getting darker. You could tell that there was problems starting to stem, especially when he's trying to drown people whilst they're swimming or boating. That should have been enough there to say, oh my god, what is going on? As a teenager, his darker side of his character started to emerge. Bundy liked to peer in other people's windows. He thought of nothing more than stealing things that he wanted. So he basically had this attitude of he would take what he wanted, regardless of what people may say. Um, he was pretty much your typical um, I'll take what I want sort of thing. So when we move on to obviously his school life and his education, he graduated from the University of Washington with a degree in psychology in 1972. He was actually accepted to attend law school in Utah, though he never earned his degree. Um, while he was there a student at the University of Washington, he actually fell in love with a wealthy, pretty young woman from California. She had everything that he wanted. Now you can imagine she had the money, she had the class, she had the influence, and unfortunately it didn't work out between Ted Bundy and herself. So you can imagine that he was massively devastated by the breakup. Now, when you look at Ted Bundy's murder victims, he many of them that he killed resembled his college girlfriend, attractive students with long dark hair. Um, by the mid 70s, you can imagine that Bundy had transformed himself, that he became more confident, he was more outweighed, he was very active in social and political into politics. He actually did get a letter of recommendation from the Republican government of Washington after working on his campaign. So you can see for there, Bundy has went from being a bit of a loner to this suddenly confident man. So when you look at obviously so far, you know, I would kind of put it in his nature, um, that what obviously he had done, um, he um, when you start to look at his crimes and what he'd done, now when you look at obviously Bundy himself, he confessed to murdering 30 women across several states in the 1970s. But as I said, the experts believe that it was a lot more closer to 100, um, because just how he was. He was a very charming. People took him as a very charming guy. He was very, he knew what to say. He was very narcissistic. Um, he afterwards he was denial. He was in very, very much denial. Um, he obviously, when we look at his style of killing, he would kid on he had a physical impairment to convince his target that he was in need of assistance, or he would be duping them into believing that he was authority. He would then lure his victims to a vehicle parked in more of a secluded area, which he would bludgeon them until they were unconscious, then restrain them with handcuffs before driving his victims to a remote location to be sexually assaulted and killed. Now, Bundy actually frequently revisited the bodies of those that he abducted, groomed, and performed sex acts on the corpses. Um, he decapitated at least 12 of his victims, keeping their several heads as mementos in his apartment. On a few occasions, Bundy would break in at homes at night and bludgeon and strangle and sexual assault his victims in their sleep. Um, it started off in Washington, Oregon, shortly after midnight on January 4th, 1974. He entered the basement apartment of an 18-year-old. Um, uh, and what he did was he basically bludgeoned them with a metal rod from her bed frame. He sexually assaulted her with the same rod, causing extensive internal injuries, rupturing her bladder. Um, there was two ladies, obviously. Sparks remained unconscious at hospital for 10 days, and though she survived, one of them was left with permanent brain damage, with significant loss to her vision and hearing. In the early hours of February the 1st, Bundy then broke into a basement room of an undergraduate, 21-year-old. He beat her unconscious, dressed her in blue jeans, a white blouse and boots, and carried her away. He later stated that he drove this lady to a secluded area where he raped and murdered her before dumping her body. Um, During the first half of 74, female college students were disappearing at some rate, about one per month. On March the 12th, a 19-year-old student in Olympia, 60 miles away, southwest of Seattle, was attending a jazz concert on the campus, but she never actually arrived. Um, Bundy claimed that he burnt the skull in his girlfriend's fireplace, in a fit of paranoia and cleanness. Um, on April the 17th, he disappeared. Morning, Eileen. I've been waiting for video. I know it's today I look terrible, Eileen. That's why I'm not putting my camera on today because I look absolutely terrible. Um, it's that one where I'm like, so she never made it to the jazz concert. On April the 17th, a 18-year-old disappeared. Oh, bless you, my love. Bless you. 18-year-old left, well, disappeared while on her way to a dorm room. Um, that was southwest of Seattle. Two female in central Washington. Um, Students later came forward to report encounters. One in the night that one of the girls disappeared. The other 3 nights earlier was a man wearing a sling who was asking for help carrying a load of books, to, to which they described it was either a brown or tan Volkswagen Beetle. On the 6th of May, um, a 22-year-old left her dormitory again at a estate to have coffee with her friends, but she never arrived. Now, this is where Bundy claims that he actually spotted this girl in the cafeteria and persuaded her to go with him to a bar. After they got in his car, he tied and gagged her and drove her back to Washington to be killed. He raped her twice on the way. On June the 1st, another 22-year-old disappeared after leaving Flame Tavern in Seattle. She was last seen with in a parking lot talking to a brown-haired man with his arm in a sling. So as you see, Bundy again is using a sling. Bundy later stated he actually brought the person back to his residence where they had consensual sexual encounter before he strangled her while she was sleeping. So this failed to explain the damage done to her skull. So you can imagine in Seattle and King County, they grew increasingly concerned that there was so many missing women happening um, that had little in common apart from similar appearances, young, attractive, long hair parted in the middle. Um, so in the early hours of June the 11th, another student, an 18-year-old, vanished while walking down a brightly lit alley between her boyfriend's dormitory and her house. The next morning, three Seattle homicide detectives combed the entire alleyway on their hands and knees, finding nothing. Yeah, they all did kind of resemble each other. They all resembled Ted Bundy's ex-girlfriend that broke up with him, and he was very, very devastated. It's said to be that the girls that he killed was very, very attractive and had brown hair. Um, so he did have a type of, all the victims did have something that resembled his ex-girlfriend. Now you can imagine that, Eileen, how scary that would be, that the fact that all these victims looked like his ex-girlfriend. Um, Bundy later told the police was his deeds prepared for being dumped. Yeah, they were, Eileen. Um, Bundy later told that he lured this young lady to his car. He knocked her unconscious with a crowbar. He handcuffed her. He drove her to basically a suburb, 20 miles east of Seattle, where he strangled her and spent an entire night with her body. The next afternoon, he returned to the alley in the very midst of a major crime scene, bearing in mind, folks, investigation. One of her earrings and one of her shoes where he had left them, um, they never picked up. It was unobserved. So it was so brazen by Bundy. He actually revisited that corpse on 3 occasions. Now Bundy had no shame. He was just like, yeah, I've I've killed someone, I'll spend the night with the body, then I'll go back and visit, 3 times on the occasion. Now you can see for there that Bundy had no shame for what he was doing. Um, his fascination to actually go back and visit these corpses. Um, after this young lady's disappearance, witnesses came forward to report seeing a man on crutches with a leg cast and carrying a briefcase in an alley behind a nearby dormitory on the night of her disappearance. And one woman actually recalled that the man asked her to help him carry the case to his car, a light brown Vauxhall Beetle, Volkswagen Beetle, sorry. During this period, Bundy was working in Olympia as an assistant director. Believe it or not, guys, wait till you hear this. He was actually working as an assistant director of the Seattle Crime Prevention Advisory Committee. Can you imagine this man who's so charming, who has got a lot in front of him, working in a crime prevention advisory committee while he is committing the worst crimes in the world? Um, where he actually wrote, believe it or not, a pamphlet for women on rape prevention. Bearing in mind that his crimes were he was a rapist. Um, he later then worked at the Department of Emergency Services, um, a state government agency, involved in the search for a missing, like for missing women. That's where he met and began dating Carol Ann Boone, um, a twice divorced mother of two, who would actually play an important role in his life at the final phase of his life 6 years later. Um, reports of the brutal attack on exactly Eileen he was hiding in plain sight. And the thing about it was Eileen, he was so charming. He was described as being this most charming man in the world who could talk his way basically out of anything. But when there was reports of the brutal attack on the women and there was 6 missing women, started appearing in newspapers, television throughout Washington and Oregon, fear actually spread among the population, especially by hitchhikers who usually were young women. The pressure mounted, as you can imagine, on the law enforcement. Um, but the fact that the physical evidence hampered them, police would not actually provide reporters with little information that was available for the fear of actually compromising the investigation. When you look further, similarities between the victims were noted. When we look at it, the disappearances took took place at night. They were usually near ongoing construction work and were actually within a week of mid-term or final exams. All victims were actually wearing slacks, blue jeans, when they disappeared. In many of the crime scenes, there was always sightings of a man wearing either a cast, a sling, had crutches, and was driving a brown or tan Volkswagen Beetle. Um, it was then in Washington and Oregon the murders accumulated on July the 14th, with the abductions and now became in broad daylight of 2 women from a beach. Um, 4 female witnesses described an attractive young man wearing a white tennis outfit with his left arm in a sling. He was actually speaking with a light accent. Maybe they didn't know whether it was Canadian or British. He introduced himself as Ted. He asked for their help in uh, unloading a sailboat from his tanner bronze-coloured Volkswagen Beetle. Sorry, I do apologise, folks. Um, Three actually refused to do it. One actually helped him as far as his car and saw that there was no sailboat and fled. Three additional witnesses saw Ted approach a young lady at 23 who was actually a probational caseworker um, with the sailboat story and watched her leave the beach in his company. And about 4 hours later, a 19-year-old woman who was studying to become a computer programmer um, left to go to a restroom and never returned. Bundy actually told the FBI that one of them was still alive when he returned, but he forced one to watch as he assaulted and murdered the other one, but he later denied it in an interview. Um, so, as you can imagine, he had upped his game now. I think Ted got to the point where he thought he was so cocky that he could get away with it, and he moved from nighttime to basically during the day sort of thing. Now, the King County Police finally armed with a description of the suspect and his car posted flyers throughout the Seattle area. They actually managed to compose a sketch, which was then printed in the regional newspapers. His abductions were well planned and rehearsed, not opportunist. Exactly, Eileen, they were. He was a very, very clever man. Ted Bundy knew everything he was doing. Um, and I think Ted Bundy believed until the very end that he could get away with all this. I think he really, really believed in his heart of hearts that he could win. Um, so the sketch was done and it was printed in the regional newspapers. Um, it went out to local TV stations. It went everywhere as you can imagine. But detectives who were receiving up to 200 tips per day thought it was unlikely that a clean-cut law student with no adult crime could be a perpetrator. Um, Now, on September the 6th, two grouse hunters stumbled across skeleton remains. An extra femur and several vertebrae were found at the site, which were later identified by Bundy as another victim. 6 months later, students from the Green River Community College discovered the skull and other parts of her body, other victims. But there was just one victim that was never ever recovered. Now, when we move on to Colorado, sorry, bit, um, in August in 74, Bundy received a second sentence from another university law school and he moved to Salt Lake City. Um, he dated at least a dozen women and he studied the first year law. Bundy was devastated to find out that the other students had something intellectual that he didn't. He found classes completely he couldn't understand, um, and that's when a whole new can of worms opened and a new string of homicides began the following month, including two that would remain undiscovered until Bundy actually confessed to them shortly before his execution. On September the 2nd, Bundy raped and strangled a hitchhiker who's still unidentified in Ohio. Then returned the next day to actually photograph and dismember the corpse before disposing the remains in a nearby river. On October the 2nd, he abducted a 16-year-old from a suburb of Salt Lake City. He confessed that the young lady was walking on a poorly lit main road. When he parked his car, he forced her into the orchid. He then restrained her. He put her into the vehicle, drove her to his apartment, where he kept her for 24 hours. And then he told the cops, obviously, where her remains were buried. But they were actually never ever found. He then went on October the 18th. There was a 17-year-old daughter of a police chief who disappeared after leaving a pizza parlour at around 9:30 p.m. Her nude body was found in a nearby mountain area 9 days later. When they did the post-mortem, it indicated that she may have been alive up to for about 7 days following her disappearance. On October the 31st, another 17-year-old disappeared after leaving a Halloween party by herself just after midnight. She was last seen trying to hitchhike. Her naked body was found by hikers 9 miles on Thanksgiving. The postmortem showed that she died on November the 20th, 20 days after her disappearance. They both had been raped, subsidized, and strangled with knee-line stockings. Actually, years later, Bundy described his post. He had rituals with the corpses, including washing their hair, shampooing their hair, and applying makeup to them. Now you can imagine how disgusting that Ted Bundy was to actually go back and basically shampooing their hair, washing their hair, and applying makeup. That shows you how cold-hearted and a cold-blooded killer that Ted Bundy was. I felt that he probably had control over, obviously, them. Um, in the late afternoon of the November 8th, he approached an 18-year-old in a mall. Um, he identified himself as an officer of the Murray Police Department, and he told this person that someone had attempted to break into her car. He actually asked her to accompany him to the station to make a complaint. When this person pointed out to Bundy that he was driving on a road that did not lead to the police station, he immediately pulled into the shoulder and attempted to handcuff her. During the struggle, he fastened both handcuffs to the same wrist, and she was actually able to open the door and escape. So he actually was unlucky there because she actually escaped. But lucky for that lady, she did escape. Later that evening, another 17-year-old student, now bearing in mind how Bundy was going through every victim, um, she, sorry, sorry, it's my cat, just been a pain in the backside. Um, so you can imagine, like, this person disappeared after leaving a theatre project at school to pick up her brother. The school dramas teachers and a student told the police that a stranger had asked each of them to come out to the parking lot to identify a car. There was another student later saw the same man pacing in the rear of the auditorium, and the drama teacher spotted him again shortly before the end of the play. Um, Investigators actually found a key that unlocked the handcuffs and removed from the lady's wrist. Bundy actually eventually admitted to abducting and keeping her at his apartment for a day, stating she was alive during half of it. Didn't he break in? Yeah, he did. Eileen, he did. He actually sexually assaulted and raped um, and murdered a few. He was very, very. He had no shame. That's all I'll say, Eileen. He had absolutely no shame. Um, in November, called a young lady. Oh, he was very, very brazen, very brazen. He became very brazen with what he was doing. Um, in November, um, there was a phone call made to the King County Police a second time after reading that a young women were disappearing in town surrounded by Salt Lake City. One of the detectives interviewed a young lady in detail. By then, Bundy had risen considerably, um, a lot of suspicion, um, but a witness considered the most reliable by detectives failed to identify him from a photo lineup. But Bundy's name was added to the list of suspects, but at that time there was no credible forensic evidence linking him to the Utah murders. In 1975, Bundy returned to Seattle after his final exams, um, where he spent a week with a young lady who did not tell him that she'd reported him to the police on 3 occasions. Um, in 1975, he actually shifted much of his crime activity eastward to Colorado. On January 12th, he there was a 23-year-old registered nurse disappeared while walking down a well-lit hallway between the elevator and her room. Her nude body was found a month later next to a dirt road just outside the resort. According to the report of the coroner, she'd been killed by blows to her head from a blunt instrument that left her groove depressions on her skull. Her assailant had also slit her earlobe, and her body also bore deep cuts from a sharp weapon. On March the 15th, um, a 26-year-old disappeared while walking from her apartment to a dinner date with a friend. Bundy later told Colorado investigators that he approached her on crutches and asked her to help carry his ski boots to his car. Where we kind of question that, like, if a gentleman has crutches and he's asking you to carry ski boots to his car, where he actually clubbed and handcuffed her before sexually assaulting her at a secondary site. Weeks later, he made the 6 hour drive to actually visit her remains. Again, very, very brazen and very, very sick. A 25-year-old disappeared near Utah Colorado border on April the 6th while riding her bike to her parents' house. Her bike and sandals were found um, near a railroad bridge. Bundy claimed he abducted her, killed her in a car, and dumped her body in the Colorado River. This admission was actually supported by gas receipts, which showed that he was in the city the same day that the person went missing. On May 6th, he parked outside a junior high school. This is where this gets quite sick, folks. I do apologise. It's strong viewers discretion advised. Um, he actually took a 12-year-old walking along by herself. He lured her into the vehicle before driving her to his Holiday Inn hotel room. He raped her, drowned her in the bathtub. He disposed of her body in the Snake River. He actually reported providing intimate details about Lynette's, well, the young lady's, sorry, personal life in his confession. Um, Island says the police didn't seem to have to coordinated well. Could this happen today, I wonder? I wouldn't be very, very surprised. I think that even in today's age, when you look at the more modern serial killers, there's a lot who got away with perfect murders. In fact, I read about one that nearly got away with murder had it not been for police actually doing a welfare check and found a body. Um, it's it's crazy, Eileen, how someone could get away. But if you think about the forensic, like how technology they've got today compared to what they had back then, was totally entirely different. In mid-May, the Bundy's co-workers visited him in Salt Lake City and stayed for a week in his apartment. Um, you know, Bundy disclosed neither his ongoing relationship with Boone or his. So he was quite a womanizer as well when you look at it. On June 28, the 28th of June, a 15-year-old vanished from the campus. Um, Her murder became Bundy's last confession, tape recorded moments before he entered the execution chamber. There was more bodies of victims. Um, in 1975, Bundy was baptised into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, though he was not an active participant in services and ignored most church restrictions. And I know people will be like, holy God, he actually got baptized. Now you look at him and he was a serial killer. He was an absolute serial killer. And you just think to yourself, how how and this has been always my fascination is how people can live double lives and how they can switch off from murdering someone to being this charming young man who lives a different life. Um, he would later be discharged by the LDS Church following his 1976 kidnapping conviction. When asked his religious, preference after his arrest, he answered that he was a Methodologist, the religion of his childhood. Um, so it ended up that in Washington state, investigators were still struggling to analyse the Northwest murder spree that ended abruptly as it had begun. In an effort to make sense of an overwhelming mass of data, they resorted to the strategy complying a database, um, which you can imagine after inputting the many lists they had, complied classmates, acquaintances, victims, Volkswagen owners named Ted, known as sex offenders, and so on. They actually queued the computer for coincidences out of thousands of names. 26 turned up on 4 lists. One was Bundy's. Detectives also manually compiled a list of their 100 best suspects, and Bundy was on that list as well. He was literally at the top of the pile of the suspects when the word came from Utah about his arrest. So on August 16th, 1975, Bundy was arrested. Um, one of the officers observed Bundy cruising an area in his Volkswagen Beetle during the pre-dawn hours. So a chase became happened. He noticed that the Volkswagen front passenger seat had been removed and placed on the rear seats and searched the car. He found a ski mask, a second mask fashioned from pantyhose, a crowbar, handcuffs, trash bags, a coil of rope, an ice pick, and some other items, initially assumed to be like burglar tools. Bundy explained that the ski mask was for skiing, obviously. He'd found the handcuffs in a dumpster, and the rest were common household items. However, the detective remembered a similar suspect in car description from the November 1974. Bundy's name um, from a young lady's phone called a month later. In the search of Bundy's apartment, police found a guide to Colorado ski resorts, with the police found um, with a check mark by the Wildwood Inn. There was a brochure advertised in the high school. Police did not have enough evidence to detain Bundy, so that he was released on his own recognition. He later said that searchers missed a hidden collection of Polaroid photos of his victims, which he destroyed after he was released. So the, basically there, Eileen, it's showing you that the police had missed a whole load of Polaroid photographs. Had they found them, I think that's when Bundy would have been arrested properly. They placed him on a 24-hour surveillance. Um, one of the officers flew to Seattle with two other detectives to interview a lady. She told them that in the year prior to Bundy's move to Utah, she had discovered objects that she couldn't understand in her house and in Bundy's apartment. These items included crutches, a bag of plasters of Paris that he admitted stealing from a medical supply house, and a meat cleaver that was never used for cooking. There was also additional objects including surgical gloves, a knife in a wooden case that he kept in his glove compartment, and a sack full of women's clothing. Bundy was in a lot of debt, and the women suspected that he'd stole almost everything of significant values that he possessed. When she confronted him over a UTV in stereo, he warned her, "If you tell anyone, I'll break your fucking neck." And that was Bundy's words to her. She said Bundy became very upset whenever she considered cutting her hair, which was long and parted in the middle. She would sometimes awake in the middle of the night to find him under the bed covers with a flashlight examining her body. He kept a wrench, taped halfway up the handle in the trunk of her car, another Volkswagen Beetle, which she often borrowed for protection. The detectives confirmed that Bundy had not been with the lady on any of the nights during which the murders had happened. Um, the young lady was interviewed by the detectives and learned of the existence of Edwards in her brief engagement to Bundy around Christmas. So you can imagine he got caught out with his womanising as well. Um, in September, Bundy sold his car to a teenager, which then police impounded it, and the FBI dismantled it and searched it. They found hairs matching samples obtained from bodies. Later, they also later, they also identified more hair strands. Um, one of the FBI lab specialists concluded that the presence of hair strands in one car matched three different victims who had never met one another. So you can imagine. On October the 2nd, detectives put Bundy into a lineup. He was immediately identified as the officer. Witnesses recognised him as the stranger, though there was still no evidence to link him to other cases. Bundy denied knowing people but had no alibi and was freed on $15,000, which was paid by his parents. He spent most of his time between the trial in Seattle, living in this young lady's house. When so you can imagine. Do we really know the full extent of his crimes? No, really. They're saying that obviously that he killed so many women, but they think that Ted Bundy killed a lot more. Will we ever find that out? I I really don't think so. But I think there's a lot more to Ted Bundy's crimes than you could ever imagine. In November, the three principal Bundy investigators um, had exchanged information with 30 detectives and prosecutors from 5 states, that they were more than convinced that Bundy was the murderer. They agreed that more hard evidence would be needed before he could be charged with any killings. In February 1976, Bundy stood trial for kidnapping. On the advice of his attorney, he waived his right to a jury due to the negativity publicity surrounding the case. After a 4-day bench trial and a weekend of thingy, judge found Bundy guilty of kidnapping and assault. In June, he was sentenced to 1 to 15 years in Utah State Prison. In October, Bundy was found hiding in bushes in a prison yard carrying an escape kit, road maps, airline schedules, and a social security card, and he spent several weeks in solitary confinement. Later that month, he was charged with more murders. After a period of resistance, he waived proceedings. It was transferred to Aspen in January 1977. On June 77, Bundy was transported 40 miles to another jail. He had elected to serve as his own attorney because Ted believed that he could get himself off of his murders, so he represented himself. Um, and as such is excused by the judge from wearing handcuffs or leg shackles. During a recess, Bundy asked to visit the courthouse law library to research his case. While shielded from his guards' view behind a bookcase, he actually opened a window and jumped to the ground from a second story, injuring his right ankle as he landed. Um, he Bundy limped through roadblocks. Um, he broke into a hunting cabin and stole food, clothing, and a rifle. The following day, he left the cabin and continued southwards towards a place but became lost in the forest. For 2 days, he wandered aimlessly on the mountain, missing two trails that led downright to his intended destination. On June 10th, Bundy broke into a camp trailer, taking food in a ski parka. However, instead of continuing southward, he walked back north towards Aspen. 3 days later, he stole a car at the edge of Aspen Golf Course. He was cold, he was sleep deprived, constant pain from his sprained ankle. When he drove back, there was two police officers noticed his car weaving in and out its lane. They pulled him over. He had actually then been a fugitive for 6 days by then. In the car there was maps of the mountain area, um, demonstrating that there was a location for a body. Um, as his own attorney, Bundy, sorry, had rights of discovery, indicating his escape had been planned. He was brought back to the jail. He ignored the advice of friends and legal advisors to stay put. The case against him, already weak at the best, was deteriorating, and you can imagine that's then when he actually decided that he needed an attorney. Um, he then thought of a new escape plan. He acquired a detailed floor plan the jail. He had a hacksaw blade from other inmates. He accumulated $500 in cash, smuggled in over a 6-month period by visitors. During the evening, while other prisoners were showering, Bundy sawed a hole about 1 square foot between the steel reinforcement bars in his cells. Having lost £35, he was able to wiggle through it and explore the crawl space above. In the weeks that followed, there was reports from an informant of movement within the ceiling during the night, which were then not investigated. Surprise, surprise. By the late 1977, Bundy's trial had become worldwide. He actually filed a motion for a change of venue to Denver. On December 23rd, the Aspen trial judge granted the request to Colorado Springs, where jurors had historically been hostile to murder suspects. On the night of December the 30th, with most of the jail staff on Christmas break in non-violent prisons on furlong with their families, Bundy actually piled books and files in his bed, covering them with a blanket to make it look like there was a sleeping body. He actually climbed into the crawl space. He broke through the ceiling into the apartment of a chief jailer who was out for the evening with his wife. He changed into street clothes, and he walked out the front door to freedom. Again, he stole a car. He drove eastward out of Glenwood Springs, but the car soon broke down, so a passing motorist gave him a ride. Um, from there, he caught a bus to Denver, where he boarded a morning flight to Chicago. Um, Back in Greenwood Springs, the jail skeleton crew did not discover the escape until noon on December the 31st. More than 17 hours. Now, 17 hours Ted Bundy was missing, but then already he was in Chicago. So then we move on to Florida. From Chicago, Bundy travelled to the train in Michigan, where he was present in, as it's unmanageable how they didn't even discover that this gentleman was away. until the noon time, and it was 17 hours later. Um, so where he was present in a local tavern on January the 2nd, he actually 5 days later he stole a car and drove it south to Atlanta, where he boarded a bus. He stayed for one night at a hotel. Um, Bundy later said that he was initially resolved to find legitimate employment. In, in his eyes, he was trying to refrain from further criminal activity, knowing that he could probably remain free non-detected in Florida for indefinite, as long as he didn't attract the attention of the police. Um, but his lone job application at a construction site had to be abandoned when he was asked to produce identification. He reverted to his old habits of shoplifting, stealing money, credit cards. Um, in the early hours of July the 15th, um, he bludgeoned a victim at 21-year-old with a piece of oak firewood as she slept. Then he strangled her with a knee-line stocking. He then entered the room with a 20-year-old. He beat her unconscious, strangled her, tore one of her nipples, bit deeply into her left buttock, and sexually assaulted her with a hair mice bottle. In another bedroom of a 21-year-old, he broke her jaw, deeply located her shoulder. In another 21-year-old, she suffered a concussion, a broken jaw, loss of teeth, and a crushed finger. Two of them survived the attack. Um, so you can imagine again this man who says he wanted to change, he didn't want to be detected, is then now again on the way to get more murders. After leaving the solitary house, Bundy broke into a basement apartment 8 blocks away and attacked a 21-year-old student. He dislocated her shoulder, fractured her jaw, and skull in 5 places. She was left with permanent deafness in the left ear. Um, so that ended that young lady's dance career. On Thomas's bed, they found semen stain in a pantyhose mask containing 2 hairs that were matched to Bundy. Um, hey Irene, hope you're well, my love. Um, on February 8th, Bundy drove 150 miles, where in a parking lot he approached a 14-year-old, but retreated when the older brother arrived and confronted him. That afternoon, he went after another 12-year-old, um, but she never. 7 weeks later, after intensive search, her partially mummified remains were found. Forensic experts discovered that she had been raped before having her throat cut and her genitals mutilated with a knife. I'm just going to take a drink right now, guys, because my throat is killing me. See, doing all this talking. I wouldn't swap it though, guys. I wouldn't swap it. So on February 12th, Bundy stole a car and fled again. Um, when he was told he was under arrest, Bundy kicked the cop's legs out from underneath him and took off. Um, the cop fired 2 warning shots and then gave a chase and tackled him. In the stolen vehicle, there was 3 sets of IDs belonging to females, 21 stolen credit cards, and a stolen TV set. Also was a dark rimmed non-prescription glasses. Um, so yeah, you can imagine. When we got to his trial in May 1978, a Florida grand trial indicated that Bundy, on charges of first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, burglary, killings, assaults, he stood trial in 79. The trial was covered by 250 reporters from 5 continents and was the first to be televised nationally in the United States. There was 5 court-appointed attorneys. Bun- Bundy again wanted to handle his own defence. From the beginning, he sabotaged the entire defence effort out of spite, distrust, delusion. Um, it was later wrote that Ted was facing murder charges with a possible death sentence, and all that mattered to him apparently that was that that he would be charged. Um, yeah, this man would give you shivers down the spine, Irene. The thing about him was he was very, very charming, very charming. So according to a public defender, the member of the defence team, a plea bargain was negotiated in which Bundy would plead guilty to killing one victim, three victims, in exchange for a firm 75 years prison sentence. Prosecutors amended the deal by one account because prospects of losing a trial were very good. Bundy, on the other hand, saw the plea bargain not only as a means of avoiding the death penalty, but also a tactical move. He could enter his plea, then wait a few years for evidence to discredit or become lost, and for witnesses to die, move on, or retract their testimony. Once the case against him had deteriorated beyond repair, he could file a post-conviction motion to set aside the plea and secure getting away with it. But at the last minute, however, Bundy refused the deal. It made him realise he was going to have to stand up in front of the whole world and say he was guilty, and he just couldn't do it. At the trial, crucial evidence came from members who placed Bundy in the vicinity of the Sorrel House that evening. Um, Also, there was people who saw him leaving the house clutching the murder weapon. There was physical evidence against him, the bite wounds, which forensics had matched to Bundy's teeth. The jury was also allowed to hear details of previous kidnappings. Um, less than 7 hours before convicting Bundy on July the 24th of 79, um, in 3 counts of obviously attempted first degree murder for the assaults on other women. Um, Bundy appealed the conviction and the death sentence because he was sentenced to death sentences. But at Florida it had affirmed them. 6 months later, a second trial took place in Orlando. Bundy was found guilty once again after less than 8 hours. Um, Important material evidence included clothing fibres, manufacturing error, um, and there was actually matching fibres from the jacket Bundy was wearing when he was arrested. During the penalty During the penalty phase of the Leach trial, Bundy took advantage of this Florida law providing that a marriage declarance in court in the presence of a judge constituted a legal marriage, as he questioned Boone, who had moved to Florida to be near Bundy. had testified on his behalf during both trials and again was testified on his behalf as a character witness. Um, he asked her to marry him, she accepted, and Bundy declared to the court that he was legally married. On February 10th, 1980, Bundy was sentenced for a third time to death by getting electrocuted. As the sentence was announced, he reportedly stood and shouted, "Tell the jury they were wrong." The third death sentence would have been one ultimately carried out nearly 9 years later. Um, there was obviously one lady who was the only one which begged for mercy. On October 24th, 1982, Boone gave birth to the daughter of Ted Bundy's. While obviously conjugal visits were not allowed at the Florida State Prison, Bundy was incarcerated. Inmates were known to pool their money in order to bribe guards to allow them to have time alone with obviously females. Um, so when we look at the death row confessions and execution, so shortly after the conclusion of the Leach trial and the beginning of a long appeals process that followed, Bundy initiated a series of interviews, speaking mostly in the third person to avoid the stigma of a confession. He began for the first time to divulge details of his crimes and throughout processes. He recounted his career as a thief, that his shoplifting, everything, the substance that he owned. The big payoff for me, he said, was actually possessing whatever it was I had stolen. I really enjoyed having something that I had wanted and gone out and taken. Possession provided to be an important motive for rape and murder as well. Sexual assault, he said, fulfilled his need to totally possess his victims. At first, he killed his victims as a matter of expediency to eliminate the possibility of being caught, but later murder became part of an adventure, which that was his words. The ultimate possession was in fact he was taking of the life, he then the physical possession of the remains. Bundy also confided in one of the special agents of the FBI, was struck by the deep, almost mystical satisfaction that Bundy took in murder. He said that after a while, murder is not just a crime of lust or violence, it became possession. They're part of you, the victim becomes a part of you, and you two are forever one. And the grounds when you kill them or leave them become sacred to you. You'll always be drawn back to them. Bundy then told the FBI agent that he considered himself to be an amateur, an impulse killer in his early years before moving into what he termed his prime or predator phase at about the time of Haley's murder in 1974. This implied that he began killing well before 1974, though he never really admitted having done so. I'll just quickly go into comments. Um, Island says he probably would not have survived prison except he have been seen to. I don't think he would have survived prison, to be honest. I think it would have been a case of like Jeffrey Dahmer. When Jeffrey Dahmer got killed in prison, I think that would have ended up happening to Bundy, to be honest. Irene says it goes to show you that people are capable of doing anything, and the only thing is actually committing the act of doing something like that. I totally agree. Eileen said would not like to have been on that jury. I think for what they'd seen, I wouldn't have liked to been on that jury either. Irene says, Eileen, I can't sleep at night knowing the details of the murder, but I do cold cases and it's gruesome as well. Eileen says it seems to have been a compulsory for no real reason. It really wasn't. I think Ted Bundy just did it because he wanted to. In July 1984, prison guards found two hacksaw blades hidden in Bundy's cell. A steel bar in one of the cell windows had been sawn through completely, top and bottom, and they were glued back into place with homemade soap paste. Several months later, guards found an authorised mirror and Bundy was moved to a different cell. Shortly, therefore, after he was charged with a disciplinary, um, in October 1984, he contacted and offered to share his self-proclaimed experience in serial killing psychology and the ongoing hunt in Washington for the Green River Killer, later identified as Gary Ridgway, who, guys, I will be covering next week. Um, so Bundy, um, but Ridgway remains at large. So in 1986, an execution date was set for March the 4th. In April, shortly after the due date, which was July the 2nd, which they moved, was announced, Bundy finally confessed, to which they believed was the full range of his crimes, including details of what he did to some of the victims after their deaths. He told them that he would revisit them, often secondary crime scenes. Often, several times, he would lie with his victims and perform sexual acts with their bodies, until purification forced him to stop. In some cases, he drove for several hours each way and remained the entire night. In Utah, he applied makeup to Smith's lifeless face and repeatedly washed one of the victims' hair. If you've got time, they can't be anything you want them. They can be anything you want them to be. Sorry, Bundy said he decapitated approximately 12 of his victims with a hacksaw. He kept at least one group of several heads, probably the four found on Taylor Mountain, um, before actually disposing of them. Less than 15 hours before the scheduled execution, um, Bundy's mental capacity to stand trial, became unquestioned, by the trial judge. During the penalty phase, required the jury to break 6-6 tie between life imprisonment and the death penalty, which ultimately they never resolved. A Uday then was sentenced, in mid-1988. A court ruled against Bundy, and in December the Supreme Court denied a motion to review the ruling. Within hours of that, a final denial was happened. A firm execution date of January 24th, 1989 was announced. Bundy's journey through the appeals courts had been unusually rapid for a capital murder case. Contrary to actually popular beliefs, the courts moved Bundy as fast as they could. Even the prosecutors acknowledged that Bundy's lawyers never employed delay tactics, though people everywhere seem to believe different. Ted Bundy was actually on the fast track. Now, he tried so many appeals and every avenue that he can, and he exhausted them out. Um, and no further motions to deny his crimes. Bundy agreed to speak frankly with investigators. He confessed to committing all 8 of the Washington and Oregon homicides, for which he was prime suspect. He described 3 additional previously unknown victims, whom he declined to identify, if indeed he ever knew their identities. He said he left a 5th corpse in Taylor Mountain. He described the crime scene, and it was like he was just there, like he was seeing everything. He was infatuated with the idea because he spent so much time there. He just totally became consumed with murder all the time. Um, he had a really bad rage against women. He had no compassion at all. He was totally engrossed in the details, his murders. It was like they were his life. It was like his life accomplished. Eileen says Dennis Neal did the same to his victims, kept them and further slept with them. Not pleasant, wasn't pleasant at all. And I will be covering him at some point. I will be. Bundy confessed to detectives that he committed numerous additional homicides, including several that were unknown to police. He was in Utah. He could bring his victims back to his apartment where he could reenact scenarios, decapitate on the covers of detective magazines. Um, so as you can imagine, Bundy began offering investigators information regarding some of the murders. There was other murders that he confessed to. So, as you can imagine, when it became clear that there was no further stays would be forthcoming from the courts, Bundy supporters began lobbying. We had a lot of fans. Can I just say, guys, when you talk about Ted Bundy, everybody was taken by Ted Bundy because of his charm, and because of who he was. Island says, I was on a training course with Dennis Neal years ago when oh, holy shit. Eileen, that must have been scary for you when you realised that he was a serial killer. Um, so he did have a lot of fans, Ted Bundy, so he did. Um, but the lady who was stood by him all the time always said about his innocence throughout all his trials and felt deeply betrayed by his admission that he was in fact guilty. She moved back to Washington with her daughter and refused to accept his phone calls. I think she was quite hurt by his relationship. Um, Bundy's final interviews with investigators on the eve of his execution, he talked about suicide. He did not want to give the state the satisfaction of watching them die. He refused his last food and he was executed by the electric chair at 7:16 a.m. on January 24th in 1989. His last words were directed at his attorney, saying, Jim and Fred, like you to give my love to my family and friends. Hundreds of relatives sang, danced, and set off fireworks from the prison as his execution was carried out, then cheered as the white hearse containing Bundy's corpse departed the prison. He was cremated and his ashes were scattered at an undisclosed location. Um, but yeah, it just shows you folks that when you look at Bundy himself, he was an unusually organised and calculated criminal who used his extensive knowledge of law enforcement. Now, I can remember that I read somewhere where a judge actually said to Bundy that he could have been a good lawyer had he stuck in. He would have been a really, really good lawyer. His crime scenes were, when you look at it really geographical. Um, his victims had a really high count. Um, Bundy's assault methods of choice were blunt force trauma, strangulation. You know, he deliberately avoided firearms due to the noise they made, and the evidence that they could leave behind. He was unusual. He was unusually skilled at physical evidence. Bundy's fingerprints were never found at a crime scene, nor any evidence of guilt. In fact, he often repeated during the years when he attempted to maintain his innocence. When you look at other significant options for the law enforcement was that Bundy's genetic anonymous physical features, and a curious chameleon-looking ability to change his appearance. Um, so you can imagine his sort of way with Bundy. Um, so when you look at obviously um, Bundy underwent multiple psychiatric exam examinations. He had violent behaviour, initially made a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, but later changed her impression more than one. She also suggested the possibility of a multiple personality disorder based on behaviours. Um, while experts found that Bundy's precise diagnosis, the majority of evidence pointed away from bipolar disorder or any psycho problems and more pointed towards antisocial personality disorder. Um, just because these traits, he's had no guilt, no remorse, no nothing. He had poor judgment, manipulative behaviour. He was a narcissist. Um, Island says they searched confidential waste bags in his office. They did. Uh, Not before time, definitely. Quite an episode in history. Thanks very much, Eileen. I hope you have really enjoyed it. I like to go in depth when I'm doing these shows and I'm talking about these serial killers. I like to look at everything. I don't just like to through the main things. I like to go in depth and really talk about, like, let's get to the bottom of actually what was actually going on from the beginning to the end. Bundy was also surprised when Emily noticed that one of his victims was missing because he imagined America to be a place where everyone is invisible except to themselves, and he was also astounded when people testified that they had seen him in incriminating places because Bundy did not believe people noticed each other. Um, but there's a lot of books wrote about Ted Bundy. There's a lot of films as well about Ted Bundy as well. Even music, people were writing music about Ted Bundy, if you believe it or not. There's also television documentaries. You've got Ted Bundy, The Devil in Disguise, An American Monster. You've got Conversations with a Killer, the Ted Bundy tapes, which is actually on Netflix. But there you go, folks. I hope you have really enjoyed the show. Next week, guys, I will be doing a special show for a good friend of mine who enjoys serial killers. So I asked her to pick me one off the top of her head, and she gave me Green River Killer, Gary Ridgway. So I will be covering that next week, folks. But thank you to everyone who's tuned in, guys. I hope you've enjoyed the show. My name is Willow, and I hope you have a happy Sunday and have a good week and stay safe, guys. Um, you're very welcome, honey. Very welcome. Oh, my darling. Guys, please check out Phantom Seekers Paranormal with Eileen. She's really lovely. Definitely a big shout out. But you guys take care and have a happy Sunday, and I'll see you all soon. Bye, everyone. Bye.